Restaurant Unstoppable. What the most successful restaurateurs know that you don't. And with excitement, allow me to introduce to you today's guest back on the show for a second time, co-CEO and co-founder of BOKA Restaurant Group, Kevin Boehm. Kevin, my man, are you feeling unstoppable today?
We are too close to the pandemic for me to say that I am unstoppable. I have too much PTSD. I unfortunately still feel stoppable. But there are forces. I survived it.
You came out the other end.
Fine. I feel unstoppable.
Dude, that is what we like to hear. So we start off every episode by popping off with a success quote or mantra. I have your original written down here. You actually gave me two when we first started. Let's see if it stays consistent. What do you got for us?
Geez, I have no idea what I said the first time. But I will say it's continue to be a student of the game.
I love that. And I think it's pretty aligned. Do you want me to read what you said the first
time? Sure, let's hear it.
Right. The key is not the will to win. It's the will to prepare to win. So I kind of feel like there's some similarities there, that constant learning. That's the will to win is to always grow, always learn, right?
Well, what's funny about the will to win is like everyone has the will to win, right?
Yeah.
that's not special.
Yeah.
The will to prepare to win is where all that difficulty is.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part.
The will for sacrifice too. And I think that's a big part that came out of your first interview. I think you said three or 4 years of working straight doubles and just putting money in envelopes, putting it away, not touching it, and just knowing that you had to sacrifice to get to where you wanted to be, which is opening a restaurant. I think you did it at the age of what, 23, 20?
Yeah, 23.
Yeah, that's incredible.
There's a pay-in process for everything in life, you know.
The will to prepare.
In the old days, it was a pension, right? Or buying something on layaway. Yeah. Does layaway still exist?
I don't know. I think so. Maybe. Who knows? So the other thing you said is 80% of success is just showing up. So that was the second quote you mentioned. But awesome way to get this thing started. And the first episode, if you guys want to listen to Kevin's first episode, it was 124. The show has evolved and changed a lot since then. It was a great interview. I highly recommend going back and listening to that interview to kind of get caught up. I'm going to reference that first interview a lot today. So head over to restaurantunstoppable.com/124. That will bring you to our first recording. It's only a 47-minute long interview, a little bit longer nowadays, but let's just get into it, man. So,
by the way, I was so young and naive in 2015. I want to go back and catch some of that energy.
Well, for what it's worth, man, we got so much great feedback on your interview. So you made an influence. Joe Fontana specifically, who's in Chicago, the founder of Fry the Coop. I don't know if you're familiar with the brand.
Yeah.
But you had a huge influence on him when he was first getting started, for what it's worth.
Wow, that's cool.
So reflecting back at that episode, one of the things that stood out to me a lot is that I think I asked, one of the questions I asked back then was, what's one thing I could have done better, or one thing I could have focused more on? And that was mentorship. But you knew at the age of 10 that you wanted this. When did the mentors start coming into your life?
Well, yeah. So I sort of knew at 10. You know, I told my parents, I think I want to own my own restaurant, even though I had no idea what that meant. And then, my mom worked at Montgomery Ward. My dad worked at a little tiny insurance company. So when that passion for restaurants actually turned into maybe me executing an actual, pathway to restaurants, I didn't know anybody in the restaurant business. I didn't even know who to ask questions to. That's kind of why I ended up in the panhandle of Florida, because I didn't know where great restaurants were. Yeah,
and it's funny you mentioned that, because you mentioned a couple times during our first recording that the goal was always Chicago. The goal was always Chicago. And I thought to myself, why did you leave Chicago? Because you want to open a restaurant where you have roots, right? What was going through your mind back then as to why you needed to go to Florida?
Well, there were a couple of things.
Okay.
One was weather.
Yeah.
I'd grown up in the cold weather and I wanted to be warm. Two, Chicago seemed scary to me still.
Yeah.
And so being in the big city. And so when I got down to Florida, I was like, okay, this makes sense. And it seemed like you could navigate things like licenses and permits and that sort of thing easier in this small town than the Panhandle than you could in the big city. And I was 100% right.
And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chicago or Florida is more of a, right-leaning state. So more favoring business, I'm assuming.
Yeah. I mean, I was able to navigate when I was a complete moron with my girlfriend at the time to open up a 6-table restaurant and get a license and all those things, way back in 1992.
Yeah.
So yeah, obviously it was very relatively easy to be able to do that in that city. So I think I chose the right city to start with, and it was like playing in Class A ball.
Yeah.
You know, I was like, I better make sure that I can hit a curveball before I go to one of these bigger cities, and I think I was right.
That's cool. So back to the question of mentors. I mean, you spent 3 years working doubles, putting money away. Was this in Florida, or did
it was in Panama City, Florida,
Okay.
and you know, I had a boss at the time named Alice Masker, who was very sweet, and you know, I probably asked a lot of questions back in those days, and she was great at sitting down with me and answering them.
Was that Ellen?
Alice.
Alice, thank you. What were the kind of questions you were curious about back then? What kind of questions were you asking?
I think I was asking everything. I kept a little notebook back then that was just like, I mean, I didn't understand any of it. You know, how does price relate to cost? You know, what kind of rent do you pay here? How much does a restaurant cost? You know, how many people does it take to make a restaurant go on a nightly basis?
How did she receive these questions?
She liked me.
Yeah.
So I think she liked my passion for it. You know, there was a lot of people in the Panhandle at the time that had all worked in restaurants for a long, long time.
Yeah.
There were people who'd, you know, servers who'd been working for 40 years at the same restaurant. And I was this young kid who was like just super passionate about furthering my education and opening up my own place. And I think I probably stood out a little bit to her.
How long were you with Alice?
2 years.
2 years. So a big chunk of the 3 years that you took to kind of prepare to open your own place.
Yeah.
As you're saying this, I can't help but think I got to stress to our listeners, if you're in this mode, you're your early 20s, late teens, whatever it is, and you want to open a restaurant, go find an Alice and ask questions. They will answer your questions, because here's the thing. They were once you, and they know how confusing it is and how many questions you have getting started. They're going to help you. What goes through your mind when I say that?
Yeah, well, I just know that for myself, or for my partner Rob Katz, or for, you know, our COO Ian Goldberg, if anybody from our company or outside of our company says, "Hey, will you come have a cup of coffee with me, and I want to ask you a few questions about the restaurant," I don't think I've ever said no to that question.
Yeah. Well, you're saying yes right now.
And you know, you look at my peers, you look at, you know, Donnie Medea, or people, you know, or Rich Melman, or Rick Bayless. Those guys do the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, or you know, around the country, Caroline Stein, Naomi Pomeroy, you know, Eric Williams here in Chicago. All these are all people that sit down with people and are willing to pay it forward.
And I'm talking to Eric Williams tomorrow. Tomorrow's Friday. Yeah. So I mean, I'm reinforcing it that they are willing to share their information. But there's another thing here too. All those people that you mentioned, these are probably the same people that when they were getting started, they were talking to each other, right, and sharing information with each other. And it's always those who are willing to go together who go way further. What are your thoughts on that? And you can speak to this better than I can, because I mean, you got started in the early 2000s. So what was the culture? Not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but what was the culture in Chicago between the restaurateurs who are at the top now? Did you know most of them?
So when I got here, which was like late 2001, early 2002, I didn't know any operators here in Chicago personally.
Yeah.
You know, and my partner Rob had been in the nightclub game. And so when we opened up that first restaurant, I think we were on an island a bit.
Yeah.
And so when Rich Melman came and sat in your restaurant to dine, my first thought was, "Hey, Rich, could I sit down for a second and ask you 50 questions?" But what's funny is a couple of years later, after we'd opened up a couple restaurants, I felt a little bit more comfortable to do that. And like, I think about Lettuce specifically, both Kevin Brown and Rich, every time that we ran into him, Rob and I kind of couldn't help ourselves but to like ask a bunch of questions.
But how did he respond to that?
Very well.
Yeah, exactly.
He was into it.
But we're also afraid to ask. And the thing is, I think the people who are at the top of their game in this industry know that they got there off of the next generation, surrounding themselves with the next generation, right? And they know that it's all about building up the next generation, which is why they are the way they are, because they surround themselves with amazing people by building them up, right?
Yeah, Rich was into it.
Yeah.
You know, you could tell. You would ask him and he would be like, "You know, Kevin, let me tell you a story about..."
That's great, though. I love that. So let's go back to the stay chronological. Let's go back.
Yeah.
You're working under Alice 2 years.
Yep.
What were the biggest lessons she taught you?
You know, Alice was extremely personable, and she could talk to anybody. and there was some sincerity to it. You know, it wasn't false. She really wanted people to have a good time, and she would mix it up at tables. And Alice was kind of a back of the house girl, who that was her when she opened up her own place, had to be more of a front of the house person. And I could see how far her communication skills took her in terms of building a regular clientele. And so the one thing that I could do well at that point was communicate.
Okay.
My food knowledge was poor. My beverage knowledge was not great. Those are all things that I could learn, but I could instantly communicate, and I could see that resonated. And, you know, at that point, I wasn't sure how important that was to somebody coming back to a restaurant.
Yeah.
I thought it was all about atmosphere. It was all about food, and it was all about, you know, the quality of beverages you served. And I didn't factor in how important the way people made you feel and feel at home inside their space was. And I think until I watched her.
Yeah. So you're saying communication, but I think that's kind of a double-edged sword, because communication, you're communicating to somebody who you have a relationship with, right? And that's really what I'm hearing from you. It's about communication and building relationships. And am I putting words into your mouth?
No, you're not at all. And building a relationship only happens when the other person feels like their sincerity in what you're asking them. And there's a big difference between me saying to you, "Hey, Eric, how you doing?" and me saying, "Eric, how are you doing?
Yeah.
It's nice to see you."
Yeah, or just the energy you're throwing off. Are you smiling with your eyes? You know,
100%.
Are you glowing to see that person? Like that's
100%.
what people are absorbing, right?
And so you took me in deep contrast to these other people that worked at these restaurants that knew a lot more about food and service. And when I started getting a lot of call tables at this restaurant, I'm sure the other servers were like, "What the hell?" But I truly wanted all the guests in my section to have an unbelievable time. Yeah. And that was sovereign of them tipping me 20%.
So
I just was really concerned about people having a good time. I was sensitive that way.
why is this something that was taught or brought up in you, or just innate in you? Where did this come from?
For some reason, I liked being a host. You know, I think it was probably, you know, my family was not very personable. They didn't have a lot of friends. We never entertained at the house. And so because we did not do that, I kind of was a searcher for that.
Filling the void.
Filling the void.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be that person who had great dinner parties at his house and had people over. And you know, I think back to, like, you know, some of the 80s television shows that I watched, and it was like, you know, Rick's Bar on Magnum PI, and Jack Tripper was a chef, and and seeing like restaurants and fine food on TV, I thought that was kind of intriguing, and I was like, here's a way that I could always be surrounded by people and entertain.
I love that. I love that. So back to these lessons from Alice: sincerity, communication skills, leadership, or relationships.
Yeah.
You said to yourself that you're a good communicator. Aside from being sincere in your communication, what makes a good communicator? What lessons did she teach you about communication?
Well, you have to be really intuitive about what a guest is looking for.
Okay.
So a guest doesn't always want to talk with me at length. Sometimes a couple might be married for 40 years and they got nothing left to say to each other, and they really want to talk to me. And so, it's what are the guest needs? And then, you know, talking about food and wine and your restaurant in a compelling enough fashion that they take your passion for it, and it actually makes the food and the wine and the room feel better than it might actually be.
So what I'm hearing from you, communication isn't so much about what you're saying. It's a part of it, but it's what you're listening to, what you're picking up on. And you're listening with all of your senses down to your sixth sense, which is, like, I would say, like, empathy and just like emotional intelligence, social intelligence. What's the low road communication telling you?
Yeah, you know, a few years ago, what I love about the Welcome Conference in New York is a lot of times they have speakers there that aren't necessarily in the restaurant business. And one year they had the head FBI negotiator, and he was talking about how talking down, you know, someone in a hostage crisis is a lot like going to a restaurant where somebody was pissed because their spaghetti was overcooked.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is about going to a table and just listening.
Yeah.
And talking to someone who's a terrorist is about listening.
Yeah. First seek to understand, then seek to be
And
understood.
is going to that table.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I was good at early on, was like, if you can take your ego out of it and you can go to a table and you can say, hey, listen, I've been told what happened over here, but before I even go into it, I'd really like to hear it directly from you.
I love that.
And them talking about it, just the act of them talking about it actually de-escalates them.
Like that's part of solving the problem. Just being, I think it's one of Danny Meyer's, what is it, 5, Danny Meyer, I always throw an S at the end of his name. Danny Meyer is 5 A's or 4 A's, or I can't remember what they are, but I think it's in there.
That's one of them. One of them's active listening.
Yes.
And so when they're telling you the story, to really show that you're paying attention, you're concerned about it.
Yeah.
It has an amazing effect on that eventual outcome.
Yeah.
And it sounds super cliche and like, you're trying to sell a book or something, but it's really true that in those situations, if you can turn something like that around, that's the easiest way to turn somebody into a regular customer.
Yes. I love that. It's writing the end of the story, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So real quick, I'm distracted because I'm interested. The Welcome Conference, has that that happened this year?
It did not.
It was virtual, right?
Yeah, it was virtual. There
Okay.
are people that did little clips and little video clips.
I just need to know when it's coming back because I haven't never been able to go and I've been wanting to go and I need to make it the next. Do you know when the next one is?
So Donnie Medea and I started a offshoot of the Welcome Conference called Welcome Chicago.
Yeah, I was
That's
gonna ask
Welcome
about that,
Conference sanctioned. It's part of that family. And so we're just talking about when the next time is going to be. I don't think it's going to be this year.
Okay.
Because we had a place booked for last year and we had to abandon it, but something will happen, I think, in 2022.
If we want to stay plugged in, what's the best? Is there an email list we can subscribe to? Where can we go?
You can find the Welcome Conference on Instagram. That's the best place to find it. Yeah.
All right, cool. I will be joining this year. I really want to go. You're going to have me in the audience for sure.
I spoke in 2017, and that was one of the most magical experiences
I've heard it's been really great, and it's right up my alley. So now back on track to what we were talking about before. So I think we've covered a lot with Alice and what she taught you about people skills, really. But what about business?
Yeah, the business stuff really probably came later.
Okay.
Like I asked little questions, but I got most of what I knew about benchmark numbers from a book called Restaurants That Work.
Okay. That's the first time recommended on the show.
I think that's the name of it. I still have it somewhere. It was published in maybe, I'm going to guess 1991, 1992. And it had studies on about 20 restaurants. One of them was Scoozy here in Chicago. One of them was Eureka, Wolfgang Puck's restaurant. And it had food cost and beverage cost and labor cost and rent cost. And so I started to figure out benchmark numbers for the first time. So that very first time that I did a P&L, I was like, I think 54% food cost is probably bad. And so, and what I see with first-time operators a lot of times that put together these pro formas, a lot of times they're based on unrealistic numbers.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people are still using those numbers from the old days, and the numbers have evolved a lot.
Yeah.
Labor cost has gone up a bit. You have to run a lower cost of goods sold than you did, say, in 2003 when we started here in Chicago, when it was 30% labor and 30% cost of goods sold equals 60%, and that's prime, and prime needs to be 60% or less. All of those things I learned kind of on my own and a slow drip of asking questions of other operators after I'd already opened up my first restaurant.
All right, I just made a note. How did you lower your cost of goods sold? And I put that in. We'll talk about this around 2015 when we get to that point.
Yes.
But I really want to unpackage that.
Yeah.
And that book that Kevin was just mentioning is Restaurants That Work, Case Studies of the Best in the Industry by Martin E. Dorff, if you're interested. Going back, so you did take a year between opening your first place and leaving Alice. Was that another mentor, or was that what was happening in this year?
I took a year between. No, I worked there until I started working on opening up my next restaurant. So I gave notice at the beach house, and I probably opened up Lazy Days Cafe, I don't know, 4 or 5, 6 months later after that.
All right. Any other key mentors, key experiences that you think set you up for success or I mean, would you call what I don't even know. Would you call Lazy Days a success? Was it?
Lazy Days was a success. Okay. Yeah, it was a success because it was basically my bachelor's degree and opening up a restaurant.
And the lessons you learned, right?
And the lessons I learned.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
day one, I reached down to put a piece of bread in the oven, and the pilot light had gone out, and the oven blew up and caught my hair on fire.
Welcome to the industry.
Stopped lunch service. Yeah. I had to go to the hospital. I spent the night in Destin Hospital. So there was lesson number one. So yeah, it cash flowed. I was able to pay myself something. I paid myself $1,000 a month. We were able to pay our rent, and eventually we got bought out. So all of those pieces were a success. But the other part of that was I did meet a lot of other people, not necessarily in the restaurant industry, that became other mentors. Kurt Tape specifically was a guy who owned Louisiana Lift Corporation, who provided all the forklifts for like all the Lowe's in the world, for instance. And he was just a kind of macro business mentor.
Who was this again?
His name was Kurt Tape.
All right.
He still lives down there. He actually eventually opened up a bed and breakfast in Grayton Beach, Florida, right near where I opened up my very first restaurant. And he was a guy who I would sit with late night over a bottle of red wine and ask her like real business questions.
Let's go deep here, because I feel like the majority of our listeners are people who are in this phase, who are about to open a good chunk. I would say at least a third of our listeners are number one, restaurant number one, going into restaurant number one, and they're just hungry for knowledge like you would have been. So looking back at that, what were the things that you did right that set you up for success with the first location?
Well, it starts with middle-class sensibility.
Okay.
So restaurants are not an easy thing to make money out of. So especially when you first start, you're not going to start and be an ace operator. So you need to do everything you possibly can to keep costs low, to not have a tremendous outlay of money that needs to go out to debt on a monthly basis. So setting that first model up for success and giving yourself a little leeway to fail is crucial.
Yeah. So when you're saying you're not talking about the money your restaurant owns, you're talking about your personal assets, your personal liabilities that you need to stay afloat. Is that where
you just need to stay afloat?
Yeah.
It's the infinite game. You just got to keep playing the game. So you see a lot of people get into it and they're like, uh-oh, I overestimated how much money I was going to make.
Yep.
I'm paying way too much money in rent.
Mm-hmm.
I've overhired people. I'm paying people too much money. I've lost $80,000 in the first 3 months we're open. And, this is going to be the shortest restaurant in history.
But what did your life look like as far as aside from the restaurant? What were your liabilities? What was going out? Like, what were your expenses as a person?
So I was kind of living without consequence because I lived in squalor. I had a shitty little apartment with my girlfriend, with a mattress on the floor.
I'd call it low class sensibility, where it's
there you go, low class sensibility. I drove a car that was on its last leg. We paid ourselves each $1,000 a month, and then we split the tips. Nobody else worked there.
Mm-hmm. What were you making for tips approximately per month?
Not that much. I'd say I was getting an extra maybe $200-300 a week in tips each.
So like $1,800 a month is what
$1,800 a month
to $2,000 a month.
Yep. So I'm making like $22,000 maybe.
Yeah.
I made that first year.
And you said it was you and who else?
Teresa, who was my girlfriend at the time.
Okay.
And we opened this up together.
Just the two of you.
Just the two of us.
6 seats.
6 tables.
6 tables. That's right.
6 tables. And so we would get up early in the morning and we would prep together, and then we would do service, and I would wash dishes and serve, and she would cook. And so we ran that thing as thin as we possibly could. And if at the end of the month there was money left in the checking account, we would have a fucking party.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, and so, but you realized real quickly, it was like, you looked at other people, and I would ask people, what you paid for rent? And I was like, ooh, that seems risky.
But I mean, it's just, I feel like so many people, they have this vision for a restaurant when they're like, when they have the dream to have a restaurant, they start dreaming what this restaurant's going to look like, and they go for it on day one, and they just go so big so soon. And what you did to get here, look where you are today. I think I read somewhere are you involved in 30 total restaurants?
Well, how many restaurants have I opened my entire life? I don't know, somewhere around 30.
Yeah, and I feel like you've taken, you're 50 now, right?
Yep.
You're almost 25, 27 years to get to your vision.
Yes.
Right? It does not happen overnight.
No.
And you have a better odds of getting there by going as small as possible. So it's all about controlling your liabilities, not like what's going out, not what's coming in.
Well, I think you can think about it these days too, is like first of all, you can make a big name for yourself in a small restaurant.
Yeah.
So you don't have to think about making some huge splash and playing Madison Square Garden the first time out.
Mm-hmm.
You can play the corner pub and still get a massive review from a huge place. And writers love to take underdogs under their wing. So I'm always like, open up something small, pour over every single plate, be so nice to every single guest that people can't help but come back to your restaurant.
That was my follow-up question. How do you become a 6-table like sensation? Like, what's the secret to doing that?
Well, I don't know if we were a sensation or not, but I will say that the people in the community, the locals, liked us, and I think they liked the story. They were like, God, what a nice little young couple that opened up their own restaurant, and they cheered for us. And so there we were there every night. We were really nice to people. Teresa cooked good food, and we were like, hidden in the shade of Seaside, Florida, on a back deck, and people were like, that's somebody I can root for.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to how we started this conversation: sincerity and relationships and communication. Just it's about the relationships, right?
Yeah.
Go
I'll just tell one Seaside
Please.
story. So I was living in Panama City, and I wanted to impress Teresa, and so she had shown me Seaside, and I was blown away by it. It was about 75 miles away from Panama City, and we drove out there one night, and we went to Josephine's Bed and Breakfast, and Josephine's was the fanciest restaurant in Seaside. It was actually like the maitre d' wore a tuxedo. It was in a bed and breakfast, and we went in there, and they had gyrodons, and when he sat me, there was only one two-top left in the restaurant. There was like 5 two-tops and 5 tables, and they gave me the one right next to this couple who was drunk and screaming and rowdy, and it was like, and I was bummed because I was trying to have this romantic night with my girlfriend. And when the maitre d' gave me the menu, he winked at me. And when I opened my menu, there was a Post-it note inside the menu, and it said, "Dear Mr. Boehm, the guy on your left is an asshole. He will be gone soon. Until then, bear with us. Love, Bruce."
Oh, I love that.
And that told me everything I needed to know about Seaside. And it taught me this massive lesson in hospitality. Before that, I thought it was all about rules, serve from the left side with your left hand to your body
it's
open
intimidating.
to people.
Yeah.
And then I was like, no. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And that opened up this whole narrow pathway for me of creative ideas that I could do on a nightly basis. I can do whatever I want.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing. That's the beauty of being human, is that you, like you said, opening up those narrow pathways. That this world that we live in, for some reason, we feel like it's rigid, but it's not. Like it is open for whatever you can think of, to be unique, to do whatever you want, and go for it, because it's going to set you apart.
I learned about the Proust questionnaire around that time, and Marcel Proust had this questionnaire that he said if you filled it out, it would kind of show you who your true self was. And at my very first restaurant, when people got done with dinner, I would give them the Proust questionnaire, and all of the best women's answers would go in the men's bathroom, and all the best men's answers would go in the women's bathroom. And that was just like one of those things. I was like, there's no rules here. I can do whatever I want.
That's awesome.
And people kind of dug it. It was a fun thing to do at the end of the meal.
Yeah, you still opened 3 other restaurants before coming, or you were in 3 other cities, I should say, before coming back to Chicago and partnering up with your business partner, Rob. But before we get into that, we talked a lot about what you did right. I know you were working for 3 years, putting money away for this point. How much did this 6-table restaurant cost? What was the and if I ask personal questions along the way, I usually tell this.
All good.
It's all because this is where we really learn, right?
Yeah,
it
cost $50,000.
$50,000. Wow. And how much of that were you able to cover that with all the money you put away?
Yeah,
that's amazing.
But it was completely out of money when we opened.
Yeah. But I just kind of want to paint that picture that starting small, right? And just having a goal and starting small. Were there any big mistakes you made with the first restaurant that are worth bringing to the conversation? That like you can help prevent other people?
I don't know if we have enough time on this
what's
podcast.
The biggest one, or the 2 that come to mind that like you can save our listeners just heartache if you were to give them a heads up on this one thing?
Well,
or 2
I
things.
think that I was probably I was so green and so naive and so moronic at that point. So I mean, to be totally honest, like at the beginning, we weren't tracking anything. I wasn't tracking sales. I didn't know what costs were going out, what was coming in. All I knew was there money left in the bank account at the end of the day. And things rarely are able to be shaped or achieved without intention.
Yeah.
So we had no goal, we had no budget, there was no intention in that regard, except let's try to be the best restaurant that we can, and let's hope some money's left at the end of the day. But but there's so many dumb things along the way. Like, we had a chest freezer outside because there was no room in the kitchen, but then it got really cold and, water got into our porous chest freezer and everything froze, and I'm in there trying to chip all this stuff away. I mean, so many bad things. But I think from a macro standpoint, there wasn't enough planning and procedures on a daily basis.
Yeah. I think that's every first restaurant.
And
you don't know what you are until you know too. Like, you have to get into it and kind of figure things out.
Yeah, but don't do anything by chance and sweat every single detail. We have a critical path that we use within our company that's like the 855 things you have to do to open up a restaurant. And it's really detailed, and it's everything you could possibly think of to open up a place. And within each of those little details, there's a bunch of other details.
Oh, I love that. I'm tempted. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I would love to see that if I'm able to.
I'll show it to you.
Yeah, that'd be incredible.
And so then you assign all of those individual things to the right person for that task. And, I'm so grateful, and we're so lucky to have all these smart people that work within our company that I know that I can, toss this thing to Ian Goldberg, and this thing to Jamie Madonia, and this thing to Julie Rue, and this thing to Abby Kreitzler. And they're all experts at their specific field.
Yes.
But when you open up, you have to be an expert at all of those things. And that's where this mentorship and all these questions come into play.
Yeah.
And you might say, well, what's your maternity leave policy? I don't know. And your first question is, what's everybody else doing? And that's where all these questions come up. And so there's a pretty steady flow of conversation that goes on within this restaurant community, specifically here in Chicago, where I'm constantly talking to a lot of people and figuring out what they're doing about something.
Yeah. And I have to give a shout out to a mutual friend. I'm pretty sure you know this man, Rudy Mick from Mick Consulting. He wanted me to say hello to you, by the way.
Yes.
And ironically, I'm partnering with him right now where we're going through a costing and profit 101 course. And I'm obviously sitting through this course. He's teaching me too. But the big takeaway up to this point is track everything. Like daily track everything. And that's the seems to be the biggest, what this course is hinging on when it comes to profitability and costing, is just tracking.
And
everything.
Eric, make that P&L your own.
Yeah.
If you look at our P&L, it is not something that gets spit out by QuickBooks or by Great Plains accounting system. It is something that we built that tells us all of the information that we need to know.
Yeah.
It's one thing to look at a P&L. It's another thing to read it, absorb it, and understand the changes you need to make it make sense.
Yeah.
And how you have to pivot and swerve to make the numbers make sense. So we create analytics for everything. Mm-hmm. What is, cleaning chemicals divided by sales, trying to figure out what the benchmark numbers are on everything. So when there are inefficiencies, when there are problems, when there's shrinkage. And the technology has never been better.
Yeah, and the other variable of the power of tracking all these things is the trust and track balance, where if you can track all these things, now you can trust so much easier because you have something to look at to make sure the job is being done right, because you have the data, and that just makes trust so much better.
There's anti-theft software that looks at everything, that can look at, how many times a bartender hit no sale, what is the timing of someone doing a void on a check, how many times a manager's opened up a closed checkout, and it takes all of that information and gives them a % chance that they're stealing or not.
Yeah, but we're recording this course live right now. And I said we are recording it. If you guys are interested, it will be available. If you're listening to this and you're saying to yourself, "I'm not doing these things that they're talking about right now," just reach out to me, Eric at restaurantunstoppable.com. I'll tell you how you can get that course. Let's move on, because I want to make sure we touch on Blue Mountain Beach, Springfield, Illinois, and Nashville. Obviously there's a lot to unpackage here, but reflecting back, what was the purpose of ending Lazy Days Cafe if it was going so well?
So Lazy Days, Lazy Days was fine, but it's hard to be in a relationship and work together 16 hours a day, and the relationship suffered for that.
Yeah.
And, Teresa went and opened up her own place. After that, I opened up my own place. They were side by side. And I opened up a wine bar, sushi bar, rock and roll bar.
Nice.
I had gone and worked at a restaurant called Harbor Docks in Destin. They had a sushi program there. I had really gotten into wine. I was like, I want to do 100 wines by the glass, and I want to have a stage and do live music. And I took my 3 things that I liked and shoved them all together.
This wasn't Blue Mountain Beach, was it?
It was Blue Mountain Beach.
It was Blue Mountain Beach. Okay.
Yeah, so just down the road in Seaside on 30A. It's a bike shop nowadays, but in 1995, it was a booming wine bar.
Okay.
And it was super fun, super successful. And, and at a certain point in 1997, I was getting this pull that it was maybe time to move on, go somewhere else. And somebody happened to make me an offer on my place, a good one. I took it, and they wanted me to sign a non-compete. And so I sold and packed up shop.
Okay. And this is when you moved back up to Springfield, Illinois.
I moved back to my hometown. Actually, I looked in Chicago first. I was like, maybe it's time for me to go to Chicago. And I remember I dined at Gordon. I dined at a restaurant called Gypsy. And I was like, I am not ready for this. These guys are operating at a much higher level than I can operate at. So I'm going to stay in my hometown. And I think this will make my mom really happy. And I'll stay in my hometown and open up a restaurant in Springfield. And I'm so glad I did, because that was the first big restaurant I opened. It's still open. It opened in 1998. It's been open for 23 years. Indigo Restaurant, 3013 West Lindbergh Boulevard. I do not own it anymore, but the Novels who own it are very nice people. And I opened up a 130-seat restaurant and really got to feel for the first time what it was like to manage a full staff and to be a mentor and to give pre-shift every night and to serve family meal every single night, and to manage the finances of a restaurant that put up a real number. And so that was kind of my, if Indigo and Lazy Days were my bachelor's degree on 30A, then Indigo Restaurant in Springfield was my master's.
Okay. Back to Blue Mountain Beach.
Yeah.
What was the name of that restaurant again?
It was called Indigo. It was Indigo Wine Bar.
Gotcha. Indigo. You said it was a lot of fun. It was a big success.
Yeah.
Back to what we did with the first restaurant, what did you do right? What were some of the mistakes you made that you can pay forward?
In the beginning, I thought that I could execute my own food program, and, I couldn't.
How many seats was the second restaurant?
It was about 60 seats. Okay. 60, 70 seats.
So 3 times.
Yeah.
As much as.
And I was like, you know what? I can do my own appetizer menu and execute it out here from the corner and work out of this one fridge. And, it was not set up for success.
Yeah.
And it seemed amateurish compared to everything else.
Okay.
Everything else that we were doing was at a pretty high level. We had great music in there. We had 100 wines by the glass. We had a great wine list. I had somebody build this beautiful bar, and then we had this kind of bullshit food program.
Okay.
That I was trying to execute, and it was like
sushi.
No, it wasn't sushi yet.
Okay.
So at this point, we were trying to do something else, and then I was like, you know what? I'm going to hire 2 sushi chefs, and we're going to. And so once we did that, and we hired Glenn and Scott to our 2 sushi chefs, and they were really great, then the whole place came together.
What did you do differently with the second restaurant that you didn't do with the first restaurant as a lesson learned from the first restaurant?
Well, I think it started with the fact that I was actually tracking sales and, and figuring out what money was going in and what money was going out. And, Jeff, my partner at it, and I were, paying ourselves on a regular basis, not just when we thought we had enough money left in the account.
Was there a practice that you were using to make sure you were paying yourself first? How are you managing cash flow?
I was just handwriting basically a P&L
Okay.
at that point. I just was like, okay, here's, I didn't understand the difference between cash and accrual or anything like that, but I just was looking at cash flow and looking on a 30-day basis, and here's how much money we spent, here's how much money we have left. I wasn't doing inventory or anything like that, so it was still very raw, but at least I kind of knew where I stood all the time. I knew what we had to do on a monthly basis in order to cover our nut, and so I at least I had more security. And it wasn't until and we can talk about this later. It wasn't until we got to BOKA where really started to tighten the screws on
Yeah,
finances.
we're getting there now, and there's just so much to unpackage. So thank you for bearing with me.
Yeah.
When you say cash versus accrual, what is that? What is the difference?
Well, a cash basis is just what comes in and what comes out, as opposed to when it was invoiced, when the expense was actually booked. And so look, those two things, you really want to look at finances within the restaurant business based on when they happened, not when you paid them.
Okay, got it. And are you still using Restaurants That Work case studies for that case studies book to learn, or what else were you using at this point?
No, that was the original baseline, but then it kind of we came up with a system that was 30% cost of goods sold, 30% labor, 4% occupancy, 16% silo.
It blows my mind that you can remember these numbers.
Yeah. That was everything else, left 20% profit.
Okay.
That's what we were looking at.
So was the
back
goal
in those
20
days.
and did you reverse engineer?
The goal was 20%.
Okay, that's what I was getting. That's what I was hoping would come is this idea of profit first.
1995, 20% profit was an achievable goal.
Yeah, and this is something I've just started doing myself, and I'm really transparent. I try to pay myself every month that comes to my checking account, $5,000 is what I try to pay myself, which sounds like a lot of money. I don't think it is personally. After, it's enough to like be able to do what I do and like pay the bills and stuff like that. But I didn't start doing that. Like now it's like that's the first thing I take, and then everything else that's left over goes towards. And like that's what what I feel like I need to be able to travel, to live a comfortable life, to cover my liabilities. I'm $200,000 in debt, so like but I just started doing this 2 years ago, and when I started just taking first tax, then profit, and that just goes away, and then everything that's left over is what I have to run the business.
The rest of it is your declining budget.
Yeah,
you work off of that declining from what you have,
and
left.
That's cash flow. That's what determines your growth.
That's right.
And there's a great book out there, Profit First, Mike Michalowicz. We did a whole course on Profit First. If you guys are interested in learning more about that, it's a powerful way of doing business. So we covered a lot with the second restaurant. You moved back up to Springfield, Illinois to be with your closer to family and to go for your first big restaurant in a market that you thought was more reasonable for you. Is that kind of safe to say? Is that what I picked up on?
Yeah, you know what? I thought about Chicago for a second, and then I'm in my hometown, and something about it felt like, this is kind of cool. I can come back to Springfield, Central Illinois.
Okay.
And it was kind of cool. I get to come back home, and this little, unknown kind of poor kid from Springfield coming back to open up a restaurant. I was like, yeah, you know what? Let's give this a shot. And it was really fun, and we killed it.
Okay.
We killed it.
Same thing. I want to kind of get to current times, start talking about BOKA, but any big lessons with this group that stand out that you can help
So this is the first one that I like really. It felt like a real restaurant. The other ones were kind of stuck together with bubblegum, and this one was like, okay, I want the walls to look like this. This is the art that I want on my walls. This is the kind of carpet I want. I want these 2 living room sections on the side. I'm going to go find a bar and refinish it. My mom and I bought a bunch of antique chairs, and we, put new fabric on them, and we reinforced them. And like, this thing was built with our hands, but it looked like a real restaurant.
So what was different in your life that let you do this versus the other ways?
I had enough money from selling my second restaurant that I could really take my time and build it exactly like I wanted to do it. Still on a budget, but the one of the great nights of my life, this is probably the top 10 great nights of my life. We finished the restaurant, and I was sitting in it, and I was so excited about the way that it looked. And I couldn't find a chef in Springfield to save my life. I'd had one who started working for me, and he quit. He thought it was too ambitious for him.
This is 1998. Right?
1998. And so I'd called a chef friend of mine named Scott Alderson, and Scott had worked for Jeremiah Tower at Stars in San Francisco in the late 80s, and he was a great chef. He was on Discovery Channel's Great Chef program. I'd met him in Seaside. I called him, and he said, I'll come up and help you for a couple weeks. He walked in the door that night, and he was like, holy shit, man. This is a real freaking restaurant. This looks amazing. He was so blown away, and I just was beaming with pride because it was a true reflection of like who I was. And, you throw yourself out there and you're like, oh God, are people going to laugh at this? And the day before, the mailman had come in, and he was like, when are you going to finish the restaurant? And I was like, it's finished. And he's like, well, you could put a drop. We had an exposed ceiling. He was like, you could drop a ceiling in here for almost nothing. And I'm like, no, that's the way I want it. And he's like, well, it's different, I guess. So that was the first feedback I got. Scott's was like, oh my God. And it was so well received, especially with like a lot of the lobbyists and state senators that came down from Chicago. And we instantly were like really successful down there. And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and as I'm listening to you, and this is your first restaurant's 1992.
Yeah,
this is 6 years later.
Yeah,
you started with a $50,000 restaurant.
Yeah,
and I think the thought that's going through my mind right now. Are you familiar with Moore's law?
No.
Which basically states that technology and things in general tend to double over time, improve double over time, but slightly more than double, like exponential. And I think that that's a reflection of human growth. Because all these things that we create are byproducts of human, they're from us, right? And if you just stay with it and you constantly improve, it's exponential, because I'm guessing that this restaurant was more than $50,000.
It was.
Yeah. So you don't have to tell us the numbers and everything, but it's the idea that if you just show up when you start where you can and you just grind and you put that money away and you constantly improve, like the growth is exponential. What goes through your mind when I say that?
Yeah, no, this is, well, back in those days, everything that I had to spend, I wasn't holding anything back. I was going to spend everything that I had on that next restaurant. So you're totally right. I was taking I put 50,000 in the last restaurant. I'm going to put all 100 in this next restaurant.
Exactly.
I was 99% artist and 1% businessman at that point, by the way. But it was paying me back when I did that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I put that in, and then that restaurant, it did 3 times the amount of sales that the restaurant did before.
Yeah. But you look at it. So year one, 50,000, and just looking at the numbers, right? 50,000, 100,000, 200,000, 400,000. And I'm not saying that this restaurant was an $800,000 restaurant, but I'm guessing it was somewhere between year 3 and year 5 in that ballpark, and that got you to the point where you could make 3 times the amount of revenue. So you got to look at it like that. You got to be patient. You got to slowly scale over time. Any big takeaways beyond what you share with us with this restaurant that you think set you up for success? Things that you're doing differently? It was your first creation. That was like an extension of.
I think the smartest thing we did was we looked at the landscape of people who were working in restaurants in Springfield at that point, and there was a lot of people just like the Panhandle of Florida who'd worked in restaurants for a long time, but they weren't excited about it. I was interviewing people, and I worked here for 15 years, but they just seemed tired, and they seemed tired of the restaurant business. And I said, I'm not hiring any of these veterans. I'm only going to hire people who it's their first job working in the restaurant business. And we had restaurant school, but all these people bought into what I was saying. And I was giving these big, Newt Rockney speeches, we're going to bring the world to Springfield, Illinois. But they bought into it.
Yeah. Got to drink the Kool-Aid.
They drank the Kool-Aid. Yeah. And people walked in, and people kept asking me to go, did you ship these people in? Where did these people come from that you have working here? And we had this young, beautiful, vibrant staff, and they were so into the restaurant. We were in a foxhole together, and that kind of foxhole mentality where, I sat everybody down and I was like, I want everybody to think of themselves as partners in this restaurant. Because if we're better, it's going to bring more customers in, and the people in the front of the house, you're going to make more money. And in the back of the house, if we make more money, I'm going to pay you more money. We're all in this together. We're all partners in this restaurant. And they bought into it.
Where did you get that mindset?
I just was looking for ways to motivate people. And so this was just me shooting from the hip.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like Tom Walter. Tasty Catering. I don't know if you're familiar.
I'm not.
He's a Chicago-based catering company, Tasty Catering Chicago. He's the author of It's My Company Too, and the idea of that is entangled organizations where everybody feels like a partner. Everybody feels like it's theirs too. And that's so powerful. How do you get that culture? What do you have to do? And I think the other thing that I pull from this is you started focusing more on getting good people with no experience, but focusing on training them.
Well, first of all, you have to treat everybody with respect, or they're going to think what you're saying is just lip service. So secondly, you got to be part of the game. I was in there and bussing tables and running food, and I was right there with them. And 3, consistency of behavior. I was in there every single night they knew that I was fighting for them, so they fought for me. And so that initial staff, we still have like a Facebook group together and we all talk, and I'm friends with all those people still. I'm lifelong friends with a lot of people who initially worked at that restaurant. I have a good friend named Tracy Wells who owns a great landscaping company in North Carolina. And she said to me, 5-6 years ago, she goes, I still think that's probably the most fun I ever had was working in Springfield, Illinois in 1998 and 99.
How'd you keep it fun?
We did a lot of special things. We did, a Frank Sinatra dinner one night. We did a Titanic dinner where we served the same menu that they served the last night in the Titanic. I was friends with songwriters from Nashville who I met in Seaside, like Kim Carnes that sang Betty Davis Eyes. She came up and did a concert at the restaurant one night. We were constantly trying to push the envelope. We bought all the Charlie Trotter's cookbooks, and we had a Charlie Trotter night, and we did a tasting menu from his cookbooks.
So events.
We did events.
Yeah.
And so just when people got bored and into that same rhythm, it was like, nope. Let's mix this up a little
especially
bit.
in today's age, I think events are so important. We kind of touched on this during 2015, our first interview. Social media can't just be like, here's today's specials. It's got to be a story. You got to bring people in. And when you have an event, you have something to celebrate. There's context, right? And that creates better media. I mean, were you back then though? I mean, it's still exciting, but you weren't creating media around this. You weren't.
Well, I was, I thought if I'm bored in the restaurant, people will see it. And so it was about, if I can keep myself and my staff excited, then the people will feel it.
I love that.
And so on a monthly basis, we did something. And if you go into Indigo Restaurant in Springfield, Illinois, still today, on the middle column is a copy of the poster of the Titanic dinner from 1998. And it resonates, and I still run to people in Springfield, Illinois. I was there the night of the Titanic dinner. And so, it just showed me that, like, keep everybody interested. And the only way to do that is constant evolution. And I've worked with some great chefs like that who constantly every month do something. It's, paint a wall, new piece of china, move some furniture around, change the menu, get new wines on the wine list, whatever it is. Constant change has an effect on the way people think and feel. And as much as people like consistency in their neighborhood restaurant, being able to go there and feel comfortable and feel at home, you can do both of those things. You can have that consistency of warmth. You can have that consistency of staff members. And at the same time, there's something a little bit exciting that happens every once in a while that just keeps them interested.
Is there anything you do in your business to make constant growth just automatic? How do you build that into your culture, this idea of constant growth? And is there an alarm that goes off every 6 months that says you haven't changed anything? Like, what do you do?
No, it's hard when you get bigger.
Yeah.
It's easy when you're in the same space all the time. Mm-hmm. When it was just one restaurant all the time, and as much as people think that BOKA proliferated very, very quickly, there was a long time in my career when I only had one restaurant. I had one restaurant in 92. I had one restaurant in 1995. I had one restaurant in 1998. I had one restaurant in 2003.
Yeah, I was going to say all the way to...
So all the way to our Landmark opened in 2005. That was the first time I ever had two restaurants at the same time. Yeah. And so I was in those four walls all the time. So I would get bored. Yeah. Now, when you had multiple restaurants, you stopped thinking about it as much. And so, but you would notice it when restaurants would plateau. And you'd be like, what's wrong with this restaurant?
Mm-hmm. So you're also tracking like a mofo at this point too. So you have a lot of information, data to let you know when something's starting to flatline.
Yeah, like Girl and the Goat has been open for, let's see, what do we turn? 11 years. It's 11 years old. It was the first restaurant that I ever saw that went up in sales every year for 10 straight years until the pandemic year.
Damn.
And so there was something about that restaurant that always kept it fresh, kept it exciting. We would do an after James Beard party, and, they would spend 3 months planning that party. I mean, Stephanie is definitely somebody who gets bored very easily. So she's constantly trying to change it and make it exciting.
Yeah.
And you see it in the sales.
Yeah. So the only thing we haven't really mentioned, and I don't want to spend a ton of time here because I really do want to start unpacking, starting current time, the evolution of BOKA. But real quick, your last restaurant before joining forces with Rob was in Nashville. You're getting closer and closer to your dream of Chicago, right? In Springfield, and then now I'm gonna go to Nashville. I'm gonna go further away again.
My least favorite story. I know. I opened up probably the story that shaped me the most, though. So I opened in Springfield. It's a big success. I sell that too, and I remember sitting down and thinking, you know what? I figured this whole thing out.
Ah, yeah.
I am so freaking smart.
That's when it gets
I
tricky.
have got this thing down. And then, I opened up a restaurant. It was told by the universe very quickly that is not the truth. And so, Nashville was poised to be a success. It was, we were on the cover of the Nashville Scene a month after we opened. It said the new Nashville, and the centerpiece of that was 6 Degrees and how we were changing Nashville, and it was a success. But I didn't know how to run a 10,000 square foot restaurant.
What
I
was
was
the previous
way over
restaurant?
my head. Springfield.
Yeah. Yeah,
Springfield was 3,500 feet.
Okay, so
I went from 3,500 feet to 10,000 square feet,
Yeah.
and I had 135 employees, and
Jeez.
I got overran.
What was it that got away from you?
Oh my gosh, where do we start? I still, coming out of Springfield, was not a systems guy, and BOKA Restaurant Group is all about systems, and all about people in the right places, and here's what you do when this happens, and our financials are super tight, and at that point I still didn't know to do that. Like, the way that I had run my restaurants, even though it had gotten a little tighter every single time, was just kind of like, you know what, we were success despite ourselves.
It sounds, I mean, you were tracking things, but it sounds like a very much culture driven operation.
Totally.
So that you're doing, which is, I mean, you can run a restaurant on culture. I believe culture eats systems and processes, but you need both. You do need both, especially if you're scaling and you're getting bigger. Like, you can't be everything to everybody at that scale. I
stopped being a student. I stopped evolving. I was a worse operator in Nashville than I was in Springfield. And this business, if you don't treat it with respect, will light you up.
Mm-hmm. So was it just so many moving parts at such a big location that it was just more than you could handle? So many moving parts. And, we were so busy in the beginning, but, it's not how much money you gross, it's how much money you keep. Mm. And we were doing more sales than I'd ever seen before, but we weren't keeping any of it because there weren't enough controls. So I had people that were stealing from me, and I'd thought just because I hired somebody to run the office that it was going to be tighter than it was before, but it wasn't necessarily. And so, I didn't understand before I went to Nashville that they had this massive liquor tax that you had to pay. And it's ridiculous.
It is. And so our wine lists weren't priced properly, and it was, it was.
So you weren't charging enough to cover the tax?
No. I mean, the way that this restaurant was built and planned for and structured was an embarrassment. Mm-hmm. And so, like, when I look back on it now, it was. And we built a beautiful restaurant, and it's Zambuca Jazz Cafe and has been since in Nashville. And I walk in there, and it's a great deal of my build out inside that place. And I used to be bitter about it, and now I'm the exact opposite, because coming off of that, when I got to Chicago, it was like, okay.
Wait, I don't understand. You used to be better about it. What do you
I used to
mean
be bitter about it.
Bitter, thank you.
I got to Chicago, and I had a big chip on my shoulder that, when you fail at something, most people are bad detectives about it. They don't look at the prime suspect, which is themselves.
Yeah.
They look at everybody else, which is what I did.
Yeah.
And I'm able to look back now and say, hey man, the buck stops with you, brother. Mm-hmm. You did this whole thing.
So the follow-up question was, if you're giving yourself advice, looking back, knowing what you know now, the younger version of yourself, what would you have done different? And it sounds like you would have owned a little bit more of it.
I would have said, don't believe the hype.
Yeah.
This is going to be harder than anything else you've done. You have to be doubly prepared for it. Spend all this time you have between selling this restaurant, opening this new one, becoming a better operator. Go stage at some different restaurants and learn from other people.
Yes.
Keep reading and plan for everything now. And don't enjoy too much of your own party.
I love it.
And 6 Degrees was a whole lot of fun. And, it's easy to get, all of a sudden, you look and, opening night, George Strait's there and Trisha Yearwood's singing on your stage. And you're like,
Made
what?
it.
Check it out. I made it, everybody. So that's what happened. And like so many cool experiences that happened there. The first time Little Big Town ever performed live was at my restaurant.
That's cool.
Keith Urban came in every single week. It was really fun. I got to see a lot of great music and we did a lot of fun stuff, but it was short lived. It was only open a year. The bounce from that though, that was my doctorate. That was, my if I wrote a thesis, it would have been on failing and what I learned from it. And I learned a million things.
What's the topic of your thesis?
Topic of my thesis should be continue to be a student of the game or the game will end for you.
Yeah. The year's 2002, 2003 at this point. You are, brushing yourself off after I don't know if you want to call it a failure, but the lessons learned with Nashville. I think you had a mutual friend with Rob that connects. Like, where are we at this point? Take us.
Yeah, so I leave Nashville with my tail between my legs. I had an opportunity to do something else in Nashville. I had an opportunity to do something in Springfield. I had an opportunity to do something in Florida. And my mom actually said to me, "Don't go backwards. You'll always regret it." She goes, "Your special skill is you know how to make stuff happen. Go up to Chicago and make something happen." And so I had 2 meetings. I met Michael Cornick for an hour and talked, and then I met with Rob, who was a friend of a friend, and my best friend James Bellatier since I was 3 years old, and his wife Trisha. Trisha worked for a guy who was best friends with Rob Katz, and so they said, "You guys should meet." Rob was in the nightclub business, wanted to get in the restaurant business. I was looking to get into the restaurant business in Chicago, and I didn't know Chicago. And we met for a cup of coffee that was supposed to be like 15 minutes, like a quick, like, "Hey, what are you looking for? Maybe we could work together." And we sat there for 4 hours.
Okay. What was it about the initial impression of Rob that was super appealing to you?
Well, we just, you just have a rhythm with somebody and a chemistry right away. We were just laughing, and he had been to my place in Nashville, and I'd been to one of his bars in Chicago. And so we were just talking about sports and life and restaurants and laughing and having a great time. And we were fast friends. Mm-hmm. And we literally said, "What's the worst that could happen? Let's try and work together."
Are you guys like visioning at this time? Are you trying to say this is?
We're just saying, let's open up something.
Okay.
And so, and to him, his big thing was, I want to open up something that has soul to it and energy, but nothing too fancy. And I had been with my, both Indigo and 6 Degrees were contemporary American restaurants that were trying to push the envelope for the towns that they were in at the time. Now, Chicago, pushing the envelope meant La Francais or Charlie Trotter. We were definitely not going to be that. So we were like, how do we mix being a contemporary American restaurant that still has a pulse and an energy and a vibe to it, but not in one of the big time neighborhoods, not Gold Coast, not River North. So we were like, let's find a neighborhood place to do a fun, energetic restaurant with a great chef that also has like a bar scene and nightlife to it. That was the very rough sketch from the original conversation. And then we went to work to try to find something.
Okay. So one of the big lessons I've learned, it seems like if you can find out where the fringe is in your community, or things seem to always happen on the fringe, on the edge. Was this going on in the back when you're thinking of location? Are you trying to, like, we don't want to be in an established community. We want to be on the leading edge of a community that's coming. Is that what was going on?
I think at that point we were just looking at like price per square foot. We were just like, well, we're not going to pay $45 a foot in River North, or whatever it was at that point. We were just, once again, middle class sensible.
Yeah.
We wanted to be, and we had this, Rob always brought up the middleweight analogy. We don't need to be heavyweights. Let's just be middleweights and be out here and do this. And, Lincoln Park at the time, Gianni was across the street and Vinci was across the street, and they had been there for a long, long time. And it seemed like a neighborhood that had some safety in it, that had a pre-theater. And if you could really connect with the destination crowd, you could maybe hit a home run, because you could fill up before theater, and then you could fill up that destination turn and get some late night. And we're like, man, we might be able to do really well here. And it had a good lease. And we said, okay. So we opened BOKA on $450,000 in 2003.
Okay.
We're 18 years ago, with a chef that we had met through an ad in the Chicago Reader. We'd put an ad out, and we'd done tastings and interviews with several chefs. And Giuseppe Scarato, who had been the chef de cuisine at MK, became our original chef there. And we were just these kind of unknowns, and we were doing a little bit of business. And then one day, somebody from Chicago Magazine came by and said, Penny Pollack and Dennis Ray Wheaton, and Dennis Ray Wheaton wrote a really great review about you, and it's about to come out in Chicago Magazine. And we're like, really?
Open the floodgates.
And it came out, and they wrote this like amazing review, and we got really busy.
Yeah.
And
it's amazing how that used to happen back. Not something, it still happens today, but not like it used to. Like one review back in the day could like set you up for life, right?
It could have. Back then it was like you had the Tribune review, the Sun-Times review, the Reader review, and Chicago Magazine. Those were really the 4 reviews that you were going to get. And if you did not get a good review in those 4, you were probably going to be done. Yeah. Now the Tribune and the Sun-Times didn't even review us when we first opened. Only review that we got was the Reader and Chicago Magazine. And that Chicago Magazine interview kind of like set us up.
Nice.
And it was pretty exciting.
Nice.
It was like because I kind of felt for myself, oh my God, I'm back. And for Rob, went from being very successful in nightclubs to shifting over to the restaurant business. So we were both kind of like trying to find our footing.
Yeah.
Me find my footing back and find my footing in Chicago, him finding footing in a new genre. And so that brought us really tight together, because, we were sitting across the bar from each other every single night and trying to build an architecture for what is the restaurant group now.
What do those conversations look like? You're visioning, right? You're saying, who do we want to be? Like start with the end in mind.
What are we doing next? And how do we structure this? And originally it was, well, you know what? Giuseppe Scarato's a great chef. Let's open up a second restaurant with him. And we did that. And then the conversation took a little bit of a turn, because we were like, maybe it doesn't make sense to do one company around one chef. Maybe it's one company around several chefs, because then no matter what we think of wanting to do, like we both love sushi, and we're like, well, we can't do a sushi restaurant with Giuseppe Scarato.
Yeah.
So are we scouts at this point? Are we building a system that could be used anywhere? And then every time we open up a new place, it's up to us and the chef to conceptualize it, design it, make it feel different. And so we knew who we didn't want to be. We knew operators where all their restaurants looked the same, no matter what concept they were. And then we knew people who had one chef that all the restaurants kind of tasted the same. And that was the biggest thing that we knew. We were like, we don't want to be that. We want to be people who walk into our restaurants and can't necessarily recognize or taste that it's by the same restaurant group. And that's okay.
Okay. So I want to unpackage that more, but I really want to learn more about your relationship with Rob first, like as far as how you guys complement each other. Because one of the biggest lessons on the show is find a partner that complements you, that's strong where you're weak. So what lanes were you guys in? How did you, what did that look like getting started? Like what were you responsible for?
Yep.
What was he responsible for? And how did that make you guys better?
So Rob was really great at he's great at real estate. He was very good at navigating permits and city hall and licensing. He was very good about cost controls, not necessarily looking at a P&L and doing, micro P&L analyzation, but he was very good at nothing was going to get out the door on him and nobody was going to steal from him. Okay. He was tight in that regard. And then I was more, training, working a floor, maybe more looking at the actual P&L standpoint. We were both guys who could walk a dining room and talk to guests and touch tables and that sort of thing. And then I think after a while, all of those skill sets just kind of bled into each other. Now it's been 20-something years together, or 20 years together, and we do a lot of the same things. But I think if you looked at us now, still, it's like when we go to open up a restaurant, you know, Rob's working on the real estate and he's the liaison with the construction team. And I'm working with the kitchen designer and I'm working on, you know, the front of the house stuff. And you know, so we still kind of veer off a little bit, but we also kind of bleed into each other a bit.
Okay. So it sounds like Rob in early days was more operations and you were more culture training.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe, but no, you know, it's like, I would say like he would negotiate the lease. I would be at the management meeting going over every line of the P&L.
Okay.
So it's not as simple as that.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many lanes.
We're both math guys.
Okay.
You know, I was always great at math. I've become that guy who's very into like P&Ls and money management and that sort of thing. He thinks about it maybe in a more macro sense than I do. Okay. Deals being made, negotiating. So he's
big picture vision. You're more up close detail.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's not that easy.
Okay. It's more of like a middle. It's not, you guys both sound like in the middle kind of dudes.
We're in every conversation together, and maybe one of us just leans a little bit more in one certain way. But it's, you know, it's tough. I wouldn't put either of us in a box because we both do all of those things.
Yeah. And when exactly did Giuseppe come on?
So this is Giuseppe Scarato, not Giuseppe Tintori. So Giuseppe Scarato was our original chef.
Oh, what are the odds you have two
Giuseppes? Yeah. Giuseppe Scarato was a BOKA from 03 to 06.
Okay.
And Giuseppe started, I believe, on Valentine's Day 2007. So he's been with us for 14 years, Giuseppe Tintori.
Okay.
So he became the chef at BOKA. And then a guy named Ben Browning was the chef at Landmark. Ryan Poley was our chef at Perennial. And then Stephanie Iser was the chef at Girl and the Goat. So our first four chefs were those four.
Yeah, but the big thing that I'm hearing from you, and I pulled this from, you probably know this name, his name, just Cameron Mitchell Restaurant Group.
Sure.
So Cameron was a guest in the show, and what I'm hearing from you is very similar to what he said. Is the trick to scaling is one of the elements to scaling, I should say, because there's so many variables, is figuring out what your systems and processes and your chassis is. Like the inner work, it's like a car, right? Like the inner workings of a car are the same. Different models just have a different exterior, different brand, maybe. Like, so the trick is you focus on the systems, the processes, the behind the scenes, the back of house kind of stuff, and then you plug in somebody who focuses on the technical detail, the thing that they're doing, the art, the craft, and then you're just a supportive role, and it's all about them. And then you just have to change the exterior for every new restaurant, not literally, but you know what I'm saying.
No,
does that line up with what I'm hearing?
No, it's totally right. We have symmetrical systems that exist in every single restaurant. They're not doing inventory or, you know, in a different way at Girl and the Goat than they are at GT Fish.
Yeah.
You know, just because Little Goat's a diner and BOKA's a Michelin-starred restaurant, you know, we're not doing our receiving there or the way we run our prep teams or the way we do our financial forum in any different way. It's the same exact way we do it at both restaurants.
Okay.
So, you know, you're absolutely right. And they're just it's the same engine in a different body. So
one of the things that I think is holding this industry back is this mentality of there isn't enough. If I can't bring on another partner, how am I going to survive? I mean, I can barely survive on my own. How are we going to afford a partner, somebody else that's cutting into the profits and all of this? I personally think that you can't do it alone anymore. If you want to be competitive, you need to have partners. And you tend to have that. It seems like you have that same mentality.
Terrible logic.
You think so?
Yeah, because
Wait, which part's terrible?
Well, the logic of that I can't afford to bring another partner on.
Okay.
You can't afford not to bring another partner on.
Okay. Yes. Okay. This is my mentality, but I want to hear from you. So explain yourself.
Well, so you're opening up multiple restaurants. You shouldn't open up another restaurant until you've actually figured out the model on your first restaurant. So let's say you open up restaurant A, and you open it up for $500,000, and you figure out how to operate a restaurant that makes $200,000 a year. So you've paid it off, and it's year 3, and you go, let's open up another restaurant. Now, the dumb person holds it too close to themselves and says, I can't afford to give any equity away to anybody else. Well, that's not true, because you're living off that first restaurant that you opened right now. And the only way the second restaurant's going to work is if you give it the same energy and respect that you gave that first restaurant.
And you physically cannot.
But you've just split yourself in two.
Yeah, it's impossible.
So you need to find someone else who is able to execute the ideas that you put into your very first restaurant, because ideas are great, but they have to be executed by somebody. So you open up that second restaurant. Once you figure out that you've built an engine that can actually win the Indy 500, and you're like, yes, I can take this engine and put it into here, but now I need somebody who's going to make it appear different, feel different, and attract a different crowd than someone else does.
That's the soul.
That's the soul of it,
Yes.
correct. And so to us, that was, you look at like when we really figured who we were as a group, and that was BOKA and Girl and the Goat and GT Fish and Belena, and we started opening up real concepts. We were like, okay, now the restaurants can distinguish themselves from each other. We're using these symmetrical systems. And then there's a Stephanie Izard and a Chris Pandel and a Giuseppe Tintori and a Lee Wolin and all these people that are so passionate about their craft and what they do that it's not only got our life in it, they're breathing their own lives into it. And people aren't even thinking about BOKA Restaurant Group. They're thinking, let's go see Lee. Let's go see Stephanie. Let's go see Giuseppe. Let's go see Chris. Let's go see Gene Cotto. That's how you do it. And so we give equity, true equity, not phantom equity, to all of these chefs that we're partners with, and also to some of the people that are in our front of the house. And we've always felt like that's an easy gift, because you're opening up a new restaurant and you give 5, 10, 15, 20% of equity away. Who cares?
Okay. I want to figure out, again, I think this is where people get caught up is the partnership agreements. How do you protect yourself? All those variables that come with partnerships. But I had a thought, and of course it escaped me. But
I can jump on that real quick if you want to.
What's that?
What you were just saying.
No, the thought just came back, but yes, I do. So it's the idea that get this thought that I can't afford to give away 50%. It's 50% that you would have never otherwise had access to.
Correct. It wasn't even going to make that amount of money.
Yeah.
50% of zero is zero.
Yeah.
50% of minus 100.
Exactly.
And so obviously Stephanie Izard is a freaking power. She's genius. She's smart. She works her tail off. There's no Girl and the Goat without Stephanie Izard. But
I really want to get into like just mindset, which is like, what is the mindset? And the mindset is like, what is the mindset? Like, what is the mindset you have to get to convince yourself to have this? It's the word that comes to my mind is abundance, right? It's just this abundance of mindset that there's enough for everybody.
Generosity reciprocates.
Yeah. And
that if you believe in people and you show them that trust and you give them ownership of it, they'll treat it as such.
Yeah, and it's not about you. And that's one of the biggest things I've learned, that success in life is not about you. It's about everybody else.
Well, I'll tell you this. If, you go back 30 years ago, and if somebody had come up to me and said, Kevin, I'm going to open up a restaurant and I'll give you 10% of it to run it, I would have said, abso-frickin-lutely, let's go. And they would have gotten so much out of me for that 10%.
Yeah.
Now, instead, I went off on my own and did my own thing. But, if somebody had caught any of these guys, if you had caught a Caroline Stein or a Bobby Stuckey or Greg Gourdet or Naomi Pomeroy or any of these great operators, if you'd caught them at a certain point and said, I'll give you equity, it would have been a huge success for anybody.
Relativity is everything, though, right?
It
Relative
is.
to that point in your career earlier on, that seems like a great deal. Is it are you saying 10% of profit, or are you saying 10% of net?
I'm saying 10% equity.
Okay.
So they would get 10% of distributable cash, and you can do this a million different ways.
So let's kind of get in.
We do it different ways, but let's take an example of a deal that we've done. 20%. We've given 20% equity before to someone of a restaurant that they had to put up no money for. Sometimes it takes 3 years to vest. They'll get paid based on their equity within those 3 years, but it doesn't become their stock for 3 years. And within those 3 years, they're an at-will employee. And on the anniversary of 36 months, that becomes their true stock to do whatever they want with.
What is it about this approach that you like?
Well, I like it because it gives you don't always know who you're going to be a partner with until you're partners with them.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do everything you can to vet it.
It's a honeymoon period.
It's a honeymoon period. And so within that first 36 months, it's a long enough time that you get to know them. It's a short enough time that, it's...
You're respecting their time.
You're respecting their time too if it doesn't work out. Exactly. Yeah. And so for us, it's pretty much always worked. At this point, we've been partners with Steph long enough. She could do something with somebody else if she wanted to, but it's never happened. We're about to do our 6th restaurant together. Is it 6? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's what gets cool is that it's this idea that so. When we're saying, I'm all over the place. I have so many questions for you right now. Before I unpackage what I was about to say, back to this idea. When you're saying equity, you're saying, say, after all the bills are paid, when looking at what's left over, what's there to be distributed amongst all the partners, you're saying 20% of that.
I'm talking about individual LLCs. There's two different things here. Okay. So first of all, there's BOKA Group LLC, which BOKA Group LLC is just what Rob and I own of every single place.
Okay.
So
the BOKA Group LLC gets a percentage of every restaurant.
Gets a percentage of every single restaurant. Some of the restaurants are self-funded by us. Some of them we've taken investors on. Whatever BOKA Group owns of the restaurant, that's what BOKA Restaurant Group is.
Got it.
And then each individual LLC, for instance, Girl and the Goat, that individual LLC, Stephanie owns part of that individual LLC. So every quarter we look at cash flow, we look at what's sitting in the bank, and we make an estimate of what we're going to distribute based on what's left in the bank. And then she gets that percentage of it.
Okay. So I know the answer to this question, but just in case somebody who's listening to this doesn't know, what's the significance of developing an LLC?
So an LLC, you can distribute cash at a different percentage than people actually own of it.
Okay.
So let's say I was going to build a restaurant and it was going to cost $1 million. And I took 10 investors who gave me $100,000 each. So $1 million was the entire raise of the restaurant. And for that, I gave them 40% ownership of the place. But if I'm only going to pay them 40% of what the restaurant makes every time there's distributable cash, it's going to take them forever to get paid back. Mm-hmm. So you distribute 80% of the profits until their principal gets paid back.
Okay.
And then it flips to 60% on the promote side, 40% to the investor side. The promote side is that sweat equity side.
Okay.
So you can only do that under an LLC. In a C corporation, you would have to distribute exactly what equity people had to themselves. LLC allows you to distribute at a different level than what they actually own of it.
Okay, got you. So every time you open a restaurant with Stephanie, I think you said there's 6 now, you're doing
let's see. Girl and the Goat, Duck Duck Goat, Little Goat, Cabra, and Girl and the Goat LA. Really 5, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
But every time you're doing business with her LLC, and is she creating a new LLC for each one of these restaurants?
No, we're creating a new LLC.
But she has her own LLC.
No.
Okay.
No. So for instance, Lamb and the Goat is Girl and the Goat, and that individual LLC is owned by BOKA Restaurant Group and by Stephanie.
Gotcha.
And then BOKA Restaurant Group is just the amount that we own in Lamb and the Goat is owned by BOKA Restaurant Group.
Got you. Okay.
Which
cool.
is owned by Ravana.
All right. Thank you for breaking that down. And
Yeah,
I think this is the stuff that intimidates people, but you don't ever hear people talking about how to set this up, which is why I'm going there. And it's weird sometimes, and people can get very defensive, like, how dare you ask about financials and business structure?
Here, I'll give it to you how we started.
Yeah.
BOKA, our first BOKA LLC, our first LLC, we raised $450,000 from 4 investors. And so they got 40% ownership for that $450,000, and Rob and I had 60%.
Got it.
And so we paid them back 80% of the principal until that $450,000 got paid back, which took like 2.5 years, and then it flipped to 60% us, 40% them.
Okay, got it. Beautiful. Thank you for getting into that. One thing that's hovering over me that I'm curious about, and we got to think about wrapping. I can't believe how fast time is going with you. We covered the benefits from your perspective, you and Rob's perspective, of finding chef partners.
Yeah.
Because you can divide and conquer, right? You can have their soul be injected into the space with your systems and general culture and vision of the greater, bigger picture, right? What's in it for them? Like, what are from a chef's perspective, why would I give up all that equity when I can own my own restaurant and own 100% of it? What are the benefits of having a group like you guys come in and manage the back house?
Well, I think the chefs could answer that better than I could. But what they would all tell you is like, if Lee Wolin would have opened up his own restaurant tomorrow, he would be like, okay, I'm gonna have to hire a graphic design company, and I'm gonna have to hire an accountant, and I don't know if they know what they're doing or not, and I'm gonna have to hire a designer, and I'm gonna have to go raise money. They're still working for somebody.
Yeah.
They're still going to have to go out and find money from someone. And a lot of times those are people that don't understand the restaurant business, that have no value add.
Yeah.
So no matter what, unless this person's independently wealthy, they still have to find somebody with money. And they're still going to have partners.
This lets them stay in their lane, which is the other variable too.
Correct.
It lets them focus on what they truly love.
100%.
Because you open a restaurant, you open any business, there's going to be parts of that you just want nothing to do with. Right? Like, you just want to do what you love, but you have to do everything. It's like the myth, like the entrepreneurial myth, that like it will be easier when you go into business for yourself, but it's not. So you absorb.
There's a lot of really awful, terrible stuff about the restaurant business. It's not fun to deal with.
But you absorb a lot of that, and you let them focus on what's important.
Yeah.
The food, and
we try to. Yeah. They still have to encounter stuff that's tough too.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things I'm curious about, and we'll start to wrap up. I mean, now paint the picture current day. Like, what consists of BOKA Restaurant Group?
Well, we just got through a pandemic, so you go back, 18 months ago when this whole thing happened. Well, it was 16 months ago, we got punched in the face just like everybody else did. It was really brutal and terrible, and what it shows for a lot of people across the United States is the fragility of the restaurant model.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like specifically, especially the sector of the industry that you were most involved in, which was high touch, chef driven, sit down, table service.
Nobody got hit harder than that.
Yeah, and that was the majority or all of your concepts? Were there any quick QSR or fast casual?
We were developing Gigi's Chicken, which is a QSR, which we're going to open a storefront for, and we were doing that out of BOKA, and that certainly helped BOKA, but everything else was service.
Yeah.
And so we got the shit kicked out of us, like a lot of people did. And it was, it was hard for everybody who worked in the restaurant business. The poor hardworking people who are the lifeblood of our restaurants, who didn't know what was happening. And, a lot of people got laid off and didn't know when their next paycheck was coming. It was brutal for everybody involved. And, your heart hurt for all the hardworking people that worked for our company. And my heart hurt for all those people who might have just started in this business. Think about people who just opened a restaurant. Like Lazy Days Cafe was done.
I mean, even if you
Indigo Wine Bar done.
I mean, if you had opened within a few months of COVID-19 kicking off, you wouldn't have gotten any of the support you needed from the government.
I would have been completely done. And I thought about that all the time. And I was grateful that we could take a lot of punches.
Yeah.
even though it was really, really difficult. So now we're on the other side of it. We're doing like 65 to 70% of the business that we did in 2019, and we're building things back, and there are a lot of good things that come with that.
Yeah, I think it's going to explode, though. I think in the next 2 months, things are going to, like, the hammer's going to drop, and it's going to be hard because there's no workforce out there.
No, there's no workforce. But you know what? It does allow you right now to really take a good look at yourself in the mirror as a company and all of the things that you do, and you're able to rebuild some things maybe in a better way.
Yeah.
And so we've taken that opportunity over the last year and said, you know what? Maybe we do need a director of inclusion within our company.
A director of inclusion?
Yeah.
Is that a role?
It is a role.
Okay, so like kind of like HR?
It's basically somebody who grades us within our company to make sure that we're representing equity within BOKA Restaurant Group in a suitable way.
I mean, that's
and having somebody that doesn't pull any punches, who says, no, you're fucking up here.
Yeah.
You don't have systems in place that allow for growth of certain people within your company.
I love
and
that.
So those are the kind of things that we've been able to look at in this last year and say, okay, we're gonna have to build a better company for tomorrow right now. And I think that's what we're doing right now. And so in this period where there aren't enough people to work for restaurants around the country, I think we're all looking at ourselves and saying, well, it's going to be really competitive. So let's build a better company, a healthier company, a company that really cares about wellness with its workers, and let's come out of this better and stronger and be as competitive about being the best company to work for as we are the best company for our guests.
Yeah, and I think this is the future of the industry. Honestly, I think, and I've been saying this. I wish I wrote a book 3 years ago so I could say I said so. But the future of the industry is it's all about its people. It's all about you need. This is one of the few industries left that can't be automated completely. With you can't automate hospitality. You can't put a robot to do human things.
Nope.
AI is coming a long way, but it's still not quite there yet. It's still not as good as a human, right? And I think that the better you take care of your people, the better you're going to attract, the better quality people you're going to attract yourself. It's all obvious, right?
Yep.
So one of the things I'm curious about before we go into the speed round is, and we have to think holistically because there's just so many moving parts within your organization. There's so many restaurants involved, but how have you evolved your systems in the past 5 or 6 years? Because you said constant evolution, constantly growing. What are the biggest things you've done systematically, culturally? You said to be more focused on the individual. Wellness is something that you're doing to change. But what about the hard systems that are the backbone of all these different brands?
I think one of the turning points, two people that I can point to as a big turning point, and one's Jamie Madonia, our CFO, and one's Julie Rue, as our Director of Strategic Initiatives. Julie was somebody who worked for Microsoft who was just intrigued by the restaurant business and wrote us a letter and said, would you consider giving me an internship? And she was well established at Microsoft at this point.
I need to pause real quick because I need to set you up, because one of the things we discussed in our first interview is that your brands right now are really just all about creating opportunity for others. That's where you were when we left off.
Yeah.
Is that was your focus. It's all about creating opportunity for others.
Yeah. Yes. And so Julie comes and she basically did the same internship we did for women's leadership with the James Beard Foundation, which was, you're going to do a different job every single month. And she literally smoked every job. She expedited for the first time at GT Prime, and Giuseppe's hard to please. And he was like, she's probably the best expediter I've ever worked with. So she killed it. And she's so smart that we were able to I was able to say to her, Julie, tell me how much it costs to make $1 in pastry at every single restaurant. This is not going to be easy because you're going to have to give credit for the pastry departments that make bread or have pastry on savory dishes and blah, blah, blah. And she would come back with a book that was 10 times better than my expectation was of it. And then Jamie, on the flip side of it, is one of those rare CFOs that has a 180 IQ of restaurants and 180 IQ of numbers and can use both of those things. And she's intuitive. She stays ahead of things. She creates numbers that are easy to navigate and easy for people to make behavioral changes based on those. And she creates actionable items for people. So those two, along with Ian Goldberg, our COO, created this financial forum that is kind of like, I would say it's like half milk and half cream. Like half of the time at this forum, we talk about how to make the restaurants a better place. And the other half, we talk about numbers, and we compare and contrast all the numbers of all our restaurants together. And there's always somebody that gets up and does a best practices lesson in front of everybody. It's like, Gene Cotto is going to talk about how he manages food cost, and Gene gets up and he talks about his stuff. And so there's always this lesson that
Where does this all live?
We do this at Swift & Sons because it's big, and
that's a physical location.
That's that's our steakhouse, but that's where we hold the financial forum usually. But our financial office, for years, we have 2 corporate offices. Our financial office above Girl and the Goat, and then we have a corporate office above Momotaro. Our entire corporate team is about 45 people.
Yeah. And the cool thing is you have all the same systems in every one of your restaurants. So the how is the same. So those being able to compare is really powerful because
it is.
Yeah. So you can really constantly like, okay, well, how are you crushing that number? How did you get that down so low?
Yeah.
Like, and then now you have the collective of the minds coming together, and you're constantly challenging, improving each other. I think that's so powerful.
But you also have to understand each restaurant. So you have to look and you'd be like, well, why would Little Goat's non-alcoholic cost be so much higher than everybody else? And you're like, because we do like 4,000 brunches every weekend and people use a lot of cream.
Yeah.
And you're like, that makes sense.
Right.
So it's not as easy just to say, why is that higher or lower? But you can look at GT Prime and Swift & Sons and look at their product mixes that are almost exactly the same on beverage and say, why does one have 2 points higher liquor costs than the other one? That shouldn't be right. We're running the same product mix. That's just like bad management. So there's been a lot of that we've seen, and we've like, well, what are you doing? Oh, well, we're doing this. And you're like, that makes sense.
So the original question was, what are you doing to evolve your systems and your processes? And it sounds like you've created a forum to have a meeting of the minds to come together to compare and contrast and constantly evolve.
As my friend Will Gadara says, what would you do if you knew you wouldn't fail? So you just throw something out and say, well, why don't we just do this every month? So I think we're open to anybody saying something like that. Like, hey guys, throw a bunch of stuff up against the wall.
Yeah.
And we'll see if it works or not.
I think did I cut you short? Am I cutting you short?
No.
The big part of that I think as far as mindset goes is you have to keep in mind that you have all these incredible people working for you, and you are the sum of all those people. But so often we never open the valve to that resource. We just say, you do this thing, that's it. But when you open the valve to that potential energy, that mind that they have, and then you create systems to open up that information, you get this flood of creativity and just creative problem solving but you have to make time for it. You have to block time to open those channels and to let the ideas flow. And that sounds like that's the biggest thing that you're doing that's different.
I say that all the time. I am the sum of these, I don't know how many people have ever worked with me. I don't know, 100,000 people.
Yeah.
I am truly the sum of all those people.
Yeah.
And if I think there's a lot of people that truly think they're the smartest people in the room, and they close themselves off to all these ideas of all these people. And it's such a huge mistake, because you're going to get a lot of bad ideas, but the one good idea is worth 1,000 bad ideas.
I think you got to look at, like, your mind is a battery, my mind is a battery, and when we're isolated, that's just so much potential energy. But when you combine, when you join those batteries together, that's so much more potential energy. And really, like, consciousness, the mind is the one thing that really is uniquely us, like awareness, right? And we can compound those things like that. I don't know, maybe I'm getting a little too woo-woo right now, but like, it's just so powerful once you understand that, like, there's a collective, like, singularity happening here, and we need to, like, open up those channels to get the most out of it.
I think even within other companies too.
Yeah.
Like, I think one of the bad parts of the restaurant business is we all held our cards way too close to our chest.
Yeah.
That, like, you would run into another operator on the street, and they would be like, how's it going? You're like, oh, I'm so busy. It's so crazy. How about you? And they'd be like, oh, I'm so busy too. Yeah. It's impossible. And we were all afraid to, like, show any vulnerability. Ego. Because we thought that ego, and we thought somebody
back
would, like,
in Springfield, or was it? No, that was you in Nashville.
Me in Nashville.
Yeah. Too
much ego, man. And so now what the pandemic did is, it was a rare week when I wasn't on the phone with, R.J. Melman or Jay Stieber from Lettuce or Steve Lombardo or Donnie Medea or, Greg Schulson from Burrito Beach, or, my friends like, Sean Feeney that owns Lilia in New York, or Will Guidara. I mean, we were all constantly chatting about what was going on, and we were saying what was really happening.
Yeah.
I'm dying right now.
Yeah. I mean, that's a problem with our industry, which I think is why we need to have these conversations more often. We need to be more vulnerable. I think the only way we're going to transform the industry, again, the mission statement of this podcast, inspire, empower, and transform, is by coming together and getting open and getting honest and sharing. Where am I? Yeah. Where are you? Where do we need to be? And how do we get there? Right? So where do we need to be? What's the general census after talking to all these people? Like, what are you guys saying?
There needs to be a model that is not as fragile. We in the old days, we'd say, hey, let's make 20% profit. And then for some reason, all of a sudden, a lot of restaurants are okay with making 4 to 5% profit and always just barely hanging on. And at the same time, not being able to pay their hard workers not enough money.
Yeah.
And so I keep saying this t-shirt that I'm wearing right now was cost, I don't know, $15 30 years ago. This t-shirt cost me $70 now. Yeah. But that hamburger you ate at the sit-down restaurant is the same freaking $16. And so prices have to go up at some point so we can pay people better, so we're not constantly, just accepting this fragile model. And within that, we can have healthier systems and healthier restaurants.
What has to happen for prices to go up?
Some people just got to jump off a cliff and do it.
Yeah.
I mean,
but I think not just some, I think everyone. And I think that's the power of sharing information.
Yeah. But how do you do that without collusion?
But here's the thing. I feel like now's the time. If there was a time for anything to happen,
it's going to go up.
It's going to happen now. But we can communicate. We can get messages out. Like I'm talking to you, man. I'm Eric Cacciatore from East Bumfuck, New Hampshire, talking to you, like the leader of BOKA restaurant, Kevin Boehm, like, and you're sharing your thoughts, and your thoughts are going to reach thousands of people in a couple of weeks. And it's a cultural shift, in my opinion, that needs to change, where restaurants need to say, hey, enough is enough. No, we react to markets. Yep. The restaurant industry has been reactive for as long as it exists.
I think the new cost of goods sold number is around 22%.
Yeah,
and I think the labor number is around 40%.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's 62.
Yeah.
And then occupancy is 6 to 7%. So that's 69. Silo is now about 20%. That leaves 11% profit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a fair place for everybody to live, is like 11 to 12% profit.
Yeah.
And at 40% labor, you can pay people a good wage.
Yeah.
And 11, 12% profit, you can still put a decent amount into your restaurants and be able to get that money back. That's where we got to find it.
Yeah. I think
between 12 and 15%.
Yeah.
I think we can get back there, but prices are going to go up. I mean, lumber prices are out of control right now.
Yeah.
And nobody thinks twice about it. But as soon as a hamburger's $19, it's fucking crazy.
Yeah. I think the thing is it comes down to what the restaurant industry has been doing for a while now is transforming the world. And I think the restaurant industry really is going to change the world because we educate people. You saw it with the farm to table.
Yep.
You saw it with, we're saying like we are not going to, when we put our foot down, the thing is the world has to follow. We're the second largest industry in the world.
Yeah.
Like people have to kind of follow. So I think by communicating and saying, hey, like we need to educate the public. This is what your food that you want, healthy, wholesome, organically grown, locally grown food that you want costs. And we fucked shit up in the past by cutting corners and trying to make things convenient and easy and cheap and
right.
And like that,
we don't want to cut corners, but here's how much it's going to cost.
Exactly. And that's the conversation that needs to happen across the boards.
I'll tell you this, the people have spoken.
Yeah.
We have whatever inventory we have out there right now post-pandemic, people are coming in and they want to come in and they want to be in restaurants. I'm
like jazzed up right now. I'm loving the conversation. I wish we could
Do you feel unstoppable?
I feel unstoppable, man. I really do. This has been great. We do have to wrap things up. We have to bust out a quick speed round.
Yep.
So anything that hasn't come out in this free flowing portion of the conversation, drop it on me.
I got one story.
Yeah.
Short one.
Give it to me. Years
Years ago at Swift & Sons, we had just opened and an operator from Green Bay came in and he'd owned his own restaurant for 50 years. He was a friend of a friend. And while we were talking, a guy came up and he was like, "Oh my God, Frank, I can't believe you're here. It's so nice to see you." And he gave him a big hug and he said, "Man, the night I spent with you after the Super Bowl was the greatest night I've ever had in my entire life. And he was like, Frank was like, oh my God, that's so sweet. And he gave him like a kiss on both sides of the cheek. And he's like, he goes, I love you, Frank. And Frank's like, I love you too, man. And the guy walked off. And Frank looked at me and he goes, two things. One, I have no idea who that man is. And he said, two, if the greatest night of his life was a night that I can't even remember, he goes, then my life must be pretty good.
That's awesome.
And that's the way I think about the restaurant business is we share all these beautiful nights with people. And, you know, and it's so beautiful. At its best, the restaurant business is amazing. Yes. Do we have a lot of problems? We have a shitload of them. But at its best, it's a really fucking great life, man.
I love that, man. And the first question I have for you is, what is your it factor? A habit, a trait, a characteristic you believe most contributes to your success?
Doer.
Doer, meaning you get things done?
Yeah.
What is your biggest weakness?
Say yes too much.
How do you overcome it?
Say no more.
Everything you say yes to is something else you're saying no to. This is one quote I heard, which I really love.
Yes.
What is one question you ask or thing you look for during the interview process? When you're growing your team, what do you want to see?
Emotion.
What is your biggest challenge today?
Finding staff.
How are you overcoming it?
Being creative. Looking for people in new ways, trying to incentivize people in new ways, making our company better and more attractive to people.
And you're talking about the inclusiveness that you're doing. You're talking about wellness. What are the other things?
More pay,
more opportunity,
better health insurance, profit sharing for managers all over the place.
Yeah. What is one code of conduct or behavior, like a core value, if you will, that you teach your team that's across all of your locations?
I don't know if we teach this or not, but I think it's a requirement that people actually like taking care of people. And if they don't have that that's not part of their value system, is actually liking taking care of people, they're not going to do well with our company.
I love it. What is one uncommon standard of service that exists in all of your restaurants that's common within BOKA Group, but not common throughout the industry to go above and beyond?
Whoosh. I would say that something that's very different than other companies is we have a what's called a black card system. We have one reservation concierge that exists in our office that you have a black titanium card, and the only thing that's on that card is a phone number, and it's a phone number to that person. It's kind of like the card in Up in the Air that George Clooney gets.
Okay. And
that person, for our best customers, will do anything they can to get them inside the restaurants. It doesn't get you anything else. There's no points. There's no free dinners. It's just a person trying like hell to get you in and is available anytime you want them.
I love that. What is one book that's a must read to make us a better person or restaurant owner? You can't say Setting the Table.
You can't say Setting the Table. No, you sure can't.
I mean, you can, but we need some more.
I'm not going to say that. I think that the tenets of Buddhism are something that's really important within a good restaurant manager or operator. And I'll tell you why. If you're a captain and you are thinking about the other table that you don't have wine service on yet, or you're thinking about you got to bust this table or somebody's waving a check at you, that you'll never give the proper service to that individual table. Present moment thinking is so important within restaurants. So, I mean, there's so many great Buddhism books out there, but I would say take your pick. There are so many beautiful things about Buddhism that translate symmetrically and beautifully to giving great hospitality.
Yeah, and we as humans have we hang on to things. And the one thing I understand about Buddhism is that it's just like you can't control the world. It's like this.
Yeah.
I think I can't remember who said that, but it's like this, and just be in the moment and coexist and just make the most of what you have.
Well, it's also, that bad things are going to happen, but you're prepared for them when they do.
Was there one book that you that comes to mind as the tenets of Buddhism, the book, or
no? I got What the Buddha Taught.
what the Buddha taught. Beautiful. We'll link to that in the show notes. This is going to be, stay tuned to the closing thoughts. I'll share the episode number with you. The next question I have is, what is one service you outsource? So this is the idea of, you recognize that it's easier to find somebody who does something better than you. Instead of doing it in-house, you outsource, not a technology, but like a service.
I think it's important, especially if you're doing things in multiple states or with one company, that you both have a service that understands the laws of your own, of the state that you're in or the city that you're in, but you also have an HR department within that. So using a company like People Matter.
Okay, beautiful. What is one technology that you've recently implemented in your business that has had a huge impact on communications, efficiencies, profitability, anything along those lines?
I like Foodager and Beverager from an inventory standpoint a lot.
Yep. They are now, they were Foodager and Beverager. I want to say they rebranded. I'll make sure to get the right brand, but it's escaping me. We will put the right name in there, and I'll mention it during the closing thoughts. The next question I have for you, and this is a doozy. So this is the last question. So be ready for it.
All right.
Really listen here. If you got the news, you're leaving this world tomorrow. All the memories of your work in your restaurants will be gone with your departure. With the exception of 3 pieces of wisdom that you can leave behind for your legacy, the good of humanity. Imagine you're giving this wisdom to your kids. What are the 3 things you're going to tell them? It's a tough one.
Wow. I think I would start with kindness reciprocates.
1.
I would follow that up with, nothing is more important than having true relationships where you know that person loves you and that you love them and that they would do anything for you. There is nothing more important than that bond in life.
2.
And 3, your own mental health, your happiness, how you feel when you go to bed at night and when you wake up in the morning. That is the true definition of success.
Yes.
If you can be centered and more happy than you are sad, and you feel good about yourself, that relationship that you have with yourself, that's true success.
Yeah, it ripples throughout everything else. It truly does. I've loved this conversation. And the name of that company, Foodager Beverager, is now Craftable. If you guys are curious,
That's
look
right.
it up, craftable.com. And we wrap up every chat by calling somebody out. Who's somebody you respect and admire in this industry? Somebody that if you found out I got on the show tomorrow, you'd be listening to that episode.
I'd like to call out the executive director of the Independent Restaurant Coalition.
Okay.
Her name is Erica Polmar. I was on the phone with 18 people on March 18th. We formed the IRC with the idea that we didn't have a big enough voice in Washington, and we wrote a bill with Earl Blumenauer of Oregon called the Restaurants Act, which eventually passed the House of Representatives and ultimately became the $28.6 billion in funding that went to restaurants. Erica Polmar is the executive director of that organization, and she works so hard for people in the restaurant industry every day, and it's stunning what she's done, and her and the 30 or 40 people that I've consistently been on the phone with for the last 18 months. A lot of days we've been on 2 or 3 Zooms a day together. Have become like a family.
Yeah. Where's she based? You know?
She's in Portland, Oregon.
All right. Look out. Next time I'm out in Portland, I'm coming after you, Erica. I would love to get you on the show. And if we are interested in joining your team, we want to come join your team. What's the best way to connect? Maybe we want to follow you on social media. What's the best way to connect?
You can follow me at Kevin Boehm BOKA. That's KEVIN BOEHM BOKA on Instagram. Feel free to send me a DM there. jobs@bokagrp.com, and you could send me an email at kevin@bokagrp.com. And if anybody ever wants to go have a cup of coffee, I'll always sit around and talk restaurants.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for taking the time, a second time, to join me, to go deeper into your story, into what makes you you, and to what makes BOKA BOKA. There is no questioning, my man. You are unstoppable. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me again. This is fun.
The pleasure was mine.
Thanks,
Cheers.
pal. See ya.